fifth heaven, met Moses, who asked him how many times he had asked him to pray. He said 50, that's way too many. So he bounces back and forth between the seventh and the fifth heaven, getting it down to 5 prayers. Comes back down to Jerusalem and flies back down to Mecca. That happens in 621. It's known as the Miraj. In 622 then, he leaves Mecca, goes up to Medina, about 80 followers, maybe some say as many as 200, and he comes there to arbitrate between the Ansar and the Jews that are there. There's a real problem. He's neutral, and he goes to do that. The Jews don't accept him, and after 2 years of trying to get them on side, they finally reject him. He rejects them, so by 624 he then confronts the Jews. I won't get into all that story because this is the classical narrative. So from 622 to 632 then, he then receives the Medinan revelations, which is the first 20 surahs of the Quran, the first 20 chapters. In 630 he goes into Mecca, walks right in without firing a shot, takes over Mecca, and then in 632 he dies through poisoning. Once he dies, Abu Bakr takes over, and for 2 years he is the caliph. He then dies naturally, gives it over to Umar, who then rules from 634 to 644. The next 10 years he is killed, and then from 644 to 656 it is Uthman that takes over. He is killed. Ali finally is given authority. He only lasts 5 years. He is the adopted son of Muhammad, and that is where the end of the Rashidun period, the golden period of Islam, this is the period that all the radicals want to take us back to, that 40-year period from 624 to 661, excuse me. Are you following that? Have you heard any other story other than what I've just told you? Have you heard any other narrative other than this? This is the only narrative you've ever heard, and this is the only one you're going to hear. This is what is taught at all our schools. This is what is taught at all our seminaries, our Bible schools. You name it. This is the only narrative you're allowed to teach. Right? Now, I've just given you a bare skeleton, and I did it, in 5 minutes? But here's the problem. Everything I have just talked about comes from this part. That's where he was living, right? 570 up to 661. So that's what I've just told you about, that red blocked area. But when was that, everything I've told you, when was it written down? It wasn't written down until that part, 765. Oh, did I say 765? No, 833, because we don't have Ibn Ishaq's material. We have nothing of what he wrote down. Nothing was written down about who Muhammad was, what he did in Mecca, what he did in Medina. Everything I've just told you in the last 5 minutes was first written down in 833. Muhammad died in 632. Do you see the problem? That means we have nothing for 200 years. Nothing for 200 years. Does that bother any of you? And that's just the Sirah. If you want to go to the Hadith, the sayings of Muhammad, we don't have anything until 870. And that's Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Ibn Dawud. They all come after 870. That's 240 years. If you want to talk about the Tafsir and the Tahqiq, you have to go to Al-Tabari, Zamakhshari, Suyuti. They all come after 923. That's the 10th century. That's 300 years later. So everything we know about what happens back here doesn't get written down till over here. Everything that happens in the 7th century is not written down till the 9th and 10th century, 200 to 300 years later. By Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Hisham, Al-Bukhari, Al-Tabari. If you don't know these names, you're Muslim, all your Muslim friends will know. These are household names. This is what they're dependent on how to live, what to do, how to walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep. All comes from these guys. Now, take a look at Christianity, Jesus Christ. What do we know about Jesus Christ? What he said, what he did. Everything we know about Jesus Christ, how Christianity began, who Jesus was, what he did, where he went, what he said, comes from 15 to 60 years after his death, written by eyewitnesses. 2 of them were eyewitnesses. You have John and you have Matthew, and Luke and Mark get it from the eyewitnesses. So you have 15 to 60 years for Christianity. We have 200 to 300 years for Islam. Can you see right there, there's a problem? Why is no one saying this? Why are we not getting this out into the public sphere? We've got to start confronting Muslims with this. Therefore, the 21st century scholars are saying Islam as we know it did not exist in the 7th century, but evolved over a period of 200 to 300 years. The Quran, and I'm going to do that in the next hour, probably was not revealed to one man in 22 years, but likely evolved over a period of 50 to 100 years. And this is what they're now concluding. The conclusion is the history of Islam, at least from the time of the Caliph Abdul Malik, hold on to that name, you'll see why. His dates are 685 to 705, and before is a later fabrication. Now, I've got to prove myself, don't I? Because that's a huge amount to claim. Their concern is this: why did it take so long to write it all down? Were these people not literate? They controlled Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo by 642, and then from Spain to India, that means from Spain to India, that whole swath of land, from Spain all the way to India, by 685, certainly someone could read and write between Spain and India. Where did the 9th century biographers get their material from, and can it be trusted if it's so late? Shouldn't we therefore go back to the period these events took place, and should we not go back to the 7th century and see what we find? Let's go back. That's what any historian should do. Let's go back to that time period. So let's do that. Now listen, I don't have a laser beam here, but if you can see that the brown area is the area we're looking at. That's the part of the world that by 661 they then controlled. And the people I'm going to be using, now these are the authorities that I'm going to be using. I'm going to be using Wandsborough, School of Oriental and African Studies. Wrote 2 books in the 1970s, Quranic Studies and Sectarian Milieu. Blew open this whole criticism. And he was the first to do this. I'm going to use Dr. Gerald Hotting, who was my professor at SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies, when I was there in 1994. Now, this was back in 1994 I got this. In 1995, I debated this with Dr. Jamal Badawi. These material, some of this material, I debated. That's 23 years ago I debated this. He had no answer for the 10 historical challenges, just 10 that I had back then. You'll see we have many more now. Dr. Patricia Corona was my supervisor when I started my doctorate. She was head of department at Oxford University, got a death threat for writing Meccan Trade in the Rise of Islam in 1987. She had moved to Cambridge University, was head of department at Cambridge University when I met her, and basically she gave me my material for that debate. Oh, you've got a laser. God bless you. Okay. Now, she reads and writes 15 languages, all archaic languages. How many of you could do that? One of the top in the world, and that's why she's so dangerous, because she goes back to the original documentation. Dr. Robert Hoyland, he reads and writes 18 languages. He was my second supervisor when I started my doctorate at Oxford. He was at Oxford University, and he wrote Seeing Islam as Others See It, one of the most pivotal books that shows exactly what was happening in the 7th century. He went back to the original language and just quoted them, put them into English so we could read that. Dr. Yehuda Neva out of Jerusalem University, who did all the material on the earliest inscriptions, and then also the German school, Dr. Luling, Dr. Puyn, Gerd Puyn, Dr. von Bothmer, and Dr. Oleg. I'll be using them more in the next lecture. They are the ones that have used and have blown open the material on the Sana manuscript and the earliest Quranic manuscripts. But I want to look at 3 books and 2 new documentaries that are paving the way. In the Shadow of the Sword by Dr. Tom Holland. He took 6 years to write that book. He then came out in 2012. This has become a bestseller in Britain. This is the book that, if you want to get started in this, read his book, because he took all this material. Now, he's a prize-winning author. He's written 3 bestsellers before this, looking at the fall of the Byzantine Empire, looking at the fall of the Roman Empire, and the fall of the Persian Empire. And I said, you need to do the next chapter, because they all fell at the 6th century. Who came next? Islam took over them, and that's why you need to write the next book. Normally he takes 3 years to write a book. This one took him 6 years. The reason why is he couldn't find any sources. And I told him that from the very beginning. You're not going to find any material to work on, because everything comes 200 to 300 years later. All right, you see the problem now. So he finally came out with this book. He was very careful what he did with this book, because when he finally put his documentary together, which came out in August 28th of 2012, that documentary caused so much fury amongst the Muslim community that they could not film it or video it a second time on Channel 4 there in the United Kingdom. But if you want that video, I have it on my computer. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's only 90 minutes long, and it unpacks much of what his book does, but he doesn't come to any conclusions. He dare not come to any conclusions. I do, and we need to, and we're going to do that today. Now, the other one is Dan Gibson. Dan Gibson, if you don't know him, you need to know him. He's a Canadian who lived in the Middle East from 1989 to 2004. He went to all the earliest mosques. He is probably the one, in fact, he's the only one I know that has actually physically gone to every one of the earliest mosques, which is what any historian should do, should they not? He went to the mosque and he looked at the coordinates, and he looked and he saw where the coordinates face. He asks the right questions. He does not have a doctorate. He is not an academic. He is an archaeologist. His father is an archaeologist. His grandfather is an archaeologist. He grew up in archaeology. He lived in Jordan. He lived in Yemen. He lived in Morocco. Speaks the language, lived amongst the Bedouin, and went into the places, physically went there to follow up on his hunches. And this is why his books are so devastating. Quranic Geography in 2011. The Sacred City is a documentary you can get off the internet in 2016. And then just last year, Early Islamic Qiblas, which is probably doing the most devastation. And I'll be using his material. Now this is what they found. These are their findings. So I'm going to start out with their findings, and then I'm going to prove their findings once I go through that. Here's the problem. The first Arab inscription referencing Muhammad, okay, the first Arab. Now, I'm not saying any inscription. I'm saying the first Arab inscription referencing this man named Muhammad is not till 691. But Muhammad died in 632. That's 60 years before any Muslim knew who he was. The first reference to people called Muslims is not till 690. So who were these people if they weren't Muslims? Well, they called themselves Saracen. They called themselves Hagarenes. They're in the line of Hagar. They called them Ishmaelites in the line of Ishmael. They called them Maghrebs from the Maghreb. And they called them Muhajirun. In Arabic, Muhajirun means people of the Hijr, people of the Exodus. They're always nomadic. They're moving from place to place. That's why they gave themselves these names. Nowhere can we find any reference to people called Muslims until the late 7th century. The first reference to Islam is on the Dome of the Rock in 691, written by created by Abdul Malik. And this is the most devastating. The first reference to Mecca is not till 741. You'll see why that's significant as we go on. The first biography, as I said earlier, of Muhammad is in the Islamic sources and not till 833. Are you looking at all that? None of this comes from the time of Muhammad. None of this, much of it doesn't even come from the same century as Muhammad. And that's why we're putting this material finally together. Here's the first problem, and it's geography. When you look at geography, you can see, if you look at the Quran, just reading the Quran, there are 65 geographical locations in the Quran. 9 of them are named. So there's lots of repetition, but only 65. When you look at those 9 places named, you will find over and over again, 23 times the word Ad comes up, which this prophet has relationship with. Who this prophet is, we don't know. Only 4 times is he referred to as Muhammad. That's as much as you'll find about Muhammad in the Quran. He's only referred to 4 times. Isa is referred to 93 times. So here's this prophet who lives in a place that has no name. Only once will you find the word Mecca in the Quran, and that's in Surah 48, Ayah 24. Chapter 48, verse 24. But 23 times they talk about Ad, which is the biblical Uz. 24 times the name of Thamud comes up, which is the Nabateans. 7 times the name Midian comes up, who are the Midianites. These are the biblical Nabateans, Uz, and Midianites. So we know about these people. These are not foreign people. What's the problem is, take a look and see where they live. They live way up here. Here's Mecca way down here. There's 600 miles. Is that not curious? So how did this prophet have relationship with these people that are 600 miles away unless he had a helicopter? Can you see the difficulty? That's the first thing that we notice, and that's why Gibson started doing his material. And then what he noticed is, when you look at the geographical references, 9 places named 600 miles too far north, all in the wrong places. If you look at this, the Gospel of Luke, we have 110 geographical references, 31 places named right where they belong, all in the right place. So when you do like with like, we don't have this problem with our Bible. This is unique to the Quran, showing that there is a problem not only with the Quran as far as geography, but with Mecca. And this is the one area that Muslims are not able to debate. They cannot debate Mecca anymore. Why? Well, Mecca is only referred to once in the Quran, chapter 48, verse 24. But what do we know about Mecca? Well, it was the first sanctuary according to mankind, according to chapter 3, verse 96. We know that in chapter 7, verse 24, that when the two of them, when Adam and Eve, Adamah and Awa, they were up in Garden of Eden. Now remember, in the Quranic account, the Garden of Eden is in space, it's not on earth. So when they were thrown out of the Garden of Eden in chapter 7, verse 24, Adam was thrown down to southern India, and Eve was thrown down to Mecca. And in 2 days later, Adam comes and meets her. How did he get from India to Mecca in just 2 days? Well, according to the traditions, he was 50 feet tall. And he just strided his way right across. Now this is the traditions. That's why you have to confront the traditions. What we do know also, it's the mother of all settlements. It's where Adam and Eve, as I just said, it's where Abraham lived, according to chapter 21, from verse 51 to 71. Abraham is in Mecca. I had no idea he lived in Mecca. I thought he was 600 miles, actually 1,000 miles further north. But there he is. He's in Mecca. Mecca was where Muhammad was born in 622. Mecca became the center of the Qibla in 624. So every mosque built after 624 must be facing Mecca, correct? Because there were no settlements before 624. Islam didn't exist before 624. The Khilafah was initiated in 624. So if you don't have a Khilafah, how do you have Islam? Are you following me? Until you have the Khilafah, there are no mosques. Got it? So prior to 624, you need to ask, or after 624, not prior, after 624, every mosque should be facing Mecca. When we look at the traditions, we look at where this place is. We notice that it's in a valley. It has a parallel valley. It's with a stream. It has outside its ruins are a pillar of salt. That it has fields. It has trees. It has grass. It has fruit. It has clay and loam. It has olive trees with mountains overlooking the Kaaba. None of that fits Mecca. Mecca is not in a valley. It does not have a parallel valley. There is no clay, loam, or trees. There is no olive trees in all of Arabia because the only olive trees that exist are near the Mediterranean. 600 miles further north. Am I getting redundant? There's a reason. So when we look at Mecca, you can see it doesn't fit everything we know about it. When you look at the trade routes, looking at the trade routes, this is a Byzantine map of the trade routes. Can you see Mecca's not even there? Mecca should be right here. Mecca's not even on the trade routes. Here's another Arab trade routes, and you can see Mecca should be right there. Missing completely. Take a look at the maps. These are official maps from the 6th century. Mecca does not exist. It should be right there. Doesn't exist. Here's another map. Mecca should be right around here. I'm sorry, right here. 7th century map. Mecca is not on any map. Here's another 7th century map. Mecca should be right about there. It's not. Mecca doesn't exist in any of these maps. Here's another 7th century map. Mecca should be right there. It's not. In every map we've looked at, you cannot find Mecca. Yet this is the center of trade. This is where Abraham lived. This is where Adam and Eve were centered, the earliest settlement in the history of mankind. And yet there is no map that shows it. This is a map from the 7th century, a modern map redacting back to the 7th century. And this is the map that Dr. Patricia Corona looked at, and she saw a real problem. She noticed that here in Aden is where all the trade was sent to from India and China over here. They came across the Arabian Gulf, and they would normally go up through the Persian Gulf right here. But the Sassanids who were here and the Byzantines who were up here were warring back and forth between the 5th, 6th, and 7th century, which shut down all the trade through the Persian Gulf. So they had to redirect it across the Arabian Sea down to Aden. And then from Aden to Najran to Sanaa to Taif to Yathrib, which is right there. That's what is now Medina. Then to Khaybar, Tabuk, and then on up to Gaza in the north. That's where the trade route went. And we know that those cities still exist today. Those cities have maybe been renamed. Yathrib is now called Medina, but those cities still exist. That's called the Western Plateau. And when she looked at this map, she said, hold on a minute. Take a look where Mecca is. Mecca is down here. You have to come up here to Taif, come down 1,000 meters, then go back up to get up to Yathrib. It's not even on the Western Plateau. Why had no one looked at a map before? So that's why she decided to do some research. Now remember, she reads and writes 15 languages. So she went back to the original documents. She went back to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, up until the 7th century. She couldn't find any reference to Mecca in any of the trading documents. All the trade did not come to Aden for one very simple reason. My 10-year-old son saw the problem. Let's see if any of you can see the problem. Those who've heard me, don't speak out. Anybody see a problem with that theory? Keep going where? Good man. He's as good as my 10-year-old son. Give him a hand. That's right. If you're coming on water, you're already over here. Why would you get it off of the water and take it 1,250 miles by land when you have a waterway going right up the west? See, today even, if you send tons of goods, you don't send it by land, you send it by sea. Why? Because it's the cheapest way to send any ton of goods anywhere. Even today, we send everything. Those huge container ships do that for that. Dr. Patricia Crone found that if you take a ton of goods and just go 50 miles, that much there, by land, that would be the same as going this 1,250 miles by sea. It would have been prohibitively expensive to go by land. Why hadn't nobody noticed this before? So she decided, rather than just come up with that theory, she decided to test it. So she went back to all the trading documents from the 2nd century right up to the 7th century, read them all in their original language, the first person to do so, and wrote a book in 1987 called Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. Read it, and it just destroys Mecca. It completely destroys the trade route. Now that's why she got her death threat, and that's why she had to move to Cambridge University, because of that book. See, this is the only area of study that what you find will kill you. Nonetheless, that book still remains, and you can read it. When she came out with that book, of course, everybody said, well, then let's see where we can find. Where is the first reference to Mecca anywhere? And they found it, 741. In the doctrine, the Apocalypse of Pseudo Methodius Continuata Byzantia Arabica. That's the first reference we can find to Mecca. That's in 741. Muhammad died in 632. That's over 100 years later. Are you seeing the problems that we're coming up with? Now let's look at modern Mecca today. You can see the Abraj al-Bayt Towers. That's the largest, 4th largest building in the world. Tallest, I'm sorry, not largest. This is what Mecca is going to look. I'm sorry this is all washed up because we had to get so far away to get the whole screen. So what we're going to do, we're going to give you this. It's much better on your laptop, and the colors are much nicer. But you can see that Mecca is going to be beautiful. They're going to redo the whole thing. Look and see what they're now doing. That's the tower. That's the 4th highest building. There's 7 skyscrapers all around. They're going to build 62 skyscrapers here. That's where all that building's going on. See, this used to be Muhammad's house. Khadija's house, the wife of Muhammad. This used to be Muhammad's birthplace. No, sorry. This is Khadija's house, and that's the house where Muhammad was born. All of it is being cemented up. And here's what's happened. Whenever you build tall buildings, what do? Well, you need to go into the ground, don't you, to build foundations. And in any important city, whether it's in Amman in Jordan or Jerusalem or Mecca, the oldest city on earth, when you dig down, the archaeologists come because as you dig, you find artifacts. Am I correct? In every ancient city, you find artifacts. And when you find artifacts, then you put them into your museum and you recreate the history of the city using those artifacts. So they have been doing that in Mecca, and the archaeologists are there, and they haven't found a thing. Not one thing has been found. There is no museum for them to show it, which suggests that this is purposely being done by the authorities in Mecca. They realize, they have now seen what we're finding out, and they're realizing that they've got to cement the whole place up so that nothing will be found. If there is no history, you don't want anybody to know about that. Now I'm being cynical, I know. But I think there's some truth to that. If you don't have Mecca until 741, if you don't have it on a map until 900, that's the 10th century. There is no map with Mecca on it until 900 AD. Muhammad died in 632. Then what are you going to do with the Qibla? The Qibla is the direction of prayer. Every mosque must be facing Mecca. Am I correct? Every mosque today, you go to any mosque anywhere in the world and they are facing Mecca. And they have to face this building right here, the Kaaba. Now today what they do, they either have a mihrab on every mosque. There's a niche there in the wall. Most mosques will have that mihrab where Mecca is. In my hotel room in Kuala Lumpur, I had this arrow pointing to where Mecca was. Now they use apps on your iPhones. So there are many ways that Muslims anywhere in the world can find out where Mecca is depending on what city they're at. In Surah 2, ayah 143 to 150, it said that the direction of the Qibla was changed in 624 AD. But it doesn't say where. It doesn't say where it was changed to. It doesn't give any name. It was just said from the farthest mosque to the great mosque. The great mosque means what? Where is this great mosque? I'd like to know. So what we're going to do now, we're going to find out where this earliest mosque is. And to do that, we need to start looking and see what Fehravadi and Creswell found. By the way, forget about that picture. I've got the wrong picture there. I meant to change it this morning. That is not the Fustat, that's not the Wasit Mosque. Back in 1905, 2 scholars went to that part of the world. You can't go there anymore and start digging. But they went and they dug down to the earliest mosques that they could find. 2 of them in what is today Iraq, called the Wasit and the Kufa Mosque, and 1 in Egypt, which is called the Fustat Mosque, outside of Cairo. Now, the Wasit Mosque and the Fustat Mosque are still there. You can still go to them. Their ruins are still there. They have not been destroyed. When they went to these mosques, both in Egypt and also in Iraq, they noticed that the Qiblas for both these mosques were facing the wrong way. They should have been facing down here, down to Mecca. But here in Iraq, they're facing directly west. Here in Fustak, they're facing directly east, and they just suggested this is towards Jerusalem. I used to say that. I did my debate on this back in 1998. And in 1998, I got drubbed by the Muslims after that debate. They said, "You have no idea what you're talking about, Mr. Smith." They were not facing Jerusalem. They were 3 to 5 degrees off. I should have listened to them. They were correct. They were 3 to 5 degrees off. They weren't facing Jerusalem all. They were facing this direction, 3 to 5 degrees off. What I should have done when and come back and well, the 3 to 5 degrees is not Mecca. Yeah. It's obviously not Mecca. It's just 100 miles further south. So what were they facing? Back in 1905, no one knew, because no one had gone to these mosques. No one had actually done any footwork. Now we do know that in 705, Jacob of Edessa, who is a Christian writer, says this. So it's clear that it is not to the south that the Jews in the Maghrebs, in the region of Syria, pray, but towards Jerusalem of the Kaaba, the patriarchal place of their races. And that's why, reading this from 705, most historians always assume, therefore, it was Jerusalem. We do have the story in Surah 2 that for 2 years, from 622 to 624, the Muslims were told to pray towards Jerusalem. But after 624, when the Jews rejected Muhammad, a new revelation came and they were to pray down towards Mecca. So most people thought these were Jerusalem. These are just old vestiges of those mosques. The problem is, look at the dates. 660, 680. Muhammad died in 632. This is 30 to 50 years too late. Nonetheless, they still today thought that maybe those were Jerusalem-facing mosques because of Jacob of Edessa. Then Dan Gibson came, and this is why this book is probably to be very devastating. The Sacred City came out in May 2016. Early Islamic Qiblats came out in 2017. And he decided to go to all these mosques, and he spent 25 years. He's still doing it. He just got back from another trip just last week. We're in contact, and he's feeding me his material. So let's look at his findings. Here's the Mosque of the Two Qiblas in Medina, 626. Look at the date. This is before Muhammad died. And what's interesting, it's called the Qiblatain Mosque. For those of you who know Arabic, Qiblatains means the mosque of two Qiblas. There are two Qiblas, and people have always wondered, why two Qiblas? They didn't know until 1987 they did a refurbishment of the mosque, and as they were refurbishing it, they came across this whole wing here, and they found a whole new Qibla. See, this is Mecca going this direction. They found that this Qibla was facing almost the exactly opposite direction. The earliest Qibla for the Qiblatain Mosque is facing north. So, what's it facing? The Mosque of the Two Qiblas changed later, but from where? Well, take a look and see where it's facing. It looks like it's going towards Jerusalem, but look what it's crossing. Gibson then went as far as China in 627. This is before Muhammad's still living at this time. In Guangzhou, which is Canton in China, he found that that mosque is facing almost directly to Petra in Jordan, not Jerusalem, not Mecca. And everyone, you'll see these 4 dials. These 4 dials are looking at the actual mosque. That's how close it is to Petra. That's how close it is to Mecca. And that's how close it is to Jerusalem. Remember, we're thousands of miles away, and yet it's facing Petra, not the other 2 cities. When he went to Guangzhou, if you look at there, you can see this is too bad that the color is kind of washed out. But that's what it should be if it's going to Mecca. The red line is where it's actually going. And it's going right through Petra. The Amman Mosque in India, in Kerala, 629. Muhammad's still living at this time. 0.26 of a degree off, almost exactly on board, facing Petra. The Jami Hama al-Kabir Mosque in Syria, 637. Muhammad has now died. This is 5 years after his death. That's 0.61 of a degrees off. It's facing Petra. Now we come to Egypt, 642, the Fustat Mosque. This is the one that Creswell and Fehérwardi looked at, and that one, since he was not permitted to do it, he's saying the degree of error, we don't know the degree of error, but it's obviously that it's facing straight east, it's obviously that it's facing Petra. The Dome of the Rock, now this is the best one because the Dome of the Rock everybody has seen. If you go to Jerusalem, you'll see it. They cannot destroy this, they have to keep it there, which means the evidence will stand for centuries. The Dome of the Rock and the entire citadel, notice the whole citadel? Take a look at what it's facing. It's facing directly towards Petra, not towards Mecca. We'll see that when we get to this mosque here, which is called the Al-Aqsa Mosque in 709. The Humeina Mosque in Jordan. Now we're back down to Jordan, over to Jordan in 699. We're getting to the end of the 7th century. It's facing Petra, not Mecca. And then we get to the Amman Mosque in Jordan in 701. Now we moved into the 8th century. Remember, Muhammad died in 632. All mosques are to be facing Mecca by 624. And now we're into 701. It's facing Petra. Here's the Grand Mosque in Sana'a in Yemen. Now we're down to Yemen at the southern borders of the Arabian Peninsula. It's 0.36 degrees off, facing Petra. The Kirbat al-Minya Mosque in Israel, 706. Look at the degrees. Now this one is obviously where it's facing because it's very close to Petra. And it's completely different from Mecca. So it's obvious that, that they didn't get their mistakes there. The Kirbat Minya, you can see where the original mosque is and now where the new one is. So when you notice up till 706, every mosque that he looked like is facing Petra. Uniquely Petra. And look how accurate they are. Why Petra? Medina, Guangzhou, Chermen, Gami, the Jami Hama, the Fustat, the Dome of the Rock, Humeina, Amman, Grand Sana, Kirbat al-Minya, every one of these mosques from thousands of miles away are all facing Petra. That's what, looking at Petra right there, and you can see how close they are as they come in within a 45-mile dotted circle. Then you get the Wasit Great Mosque of Iraq in 706, and suddenly the Qibla changes to a between direction, almost halfway directly between Mecca and Petra. What's going on? Something's happening here. So this is not Petra, this is not Mecca, it's almost halfway in between. That's the second Qibla, Qibla number 2. When it comes to the Masjid Itaraq Mosque in Iraq, it's back to Petra again. So back in 708, back to Petra. The Al-Aqsa Mosque that I mentioned earlier, there's the Al-Aqsa, there's the Dome of the Rock, right on the same citadel. It is facing directly towards Petra, as is the whole citadel. So now we're in the 8th century, well into the 8th century, 709, they're still facing Petra. You can see there, if you look at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, there's, you can't really see it, I'm sorry, it's too washed out with this light coming in. But both the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa are facing Petra. The Jami al-Umawi al-Kabir Damascus Mosque, again, take a look. This one is in between. This is the second one he found that's that in between, almost directly in between. Here's the one in Jericho in Israel, back to Petra again. So what's happened to Mecca? We have yet found no mosque that's facing Mecca. We're now in 714. Muhammad died in 632. The mosques were canonized in 624. We're 90 years later, and still we cannot find any mosque that's facing Mecca. Here's the Anjar Mosque in Lebanon, 714. Petra again. The Mosque of Umar Bosra in Syria, 721. Look at this one is in between. Here's 726, Hayr al-Karbi Mosque in Syria. It's in between. It is not till we get to this mosque in Banbor in Pakistan that we find the first mosque that's facing Mecca. Look at the date, 727. Let me remind you that the Qiblas were canonized in 624. This is 727, this is over 100 years later that we find the first mosque facing Mecca. So this is Qibla number 3. Are you following the number of Qiblas? The first Qibla is to Petra. The second Qibla is in between. The third Qibla is now to Mecca, finally towards Mecca. And then we get to Qasr al-Hayr al-Sharqi, Syria, 728. It's in between. The Amman Citadel Mosque. Now hold on and take a look at this picture a little closer. I've already talked about the Amman Mosque. I talked about this one here. Remember earlier? This one here? That was 701. This one here then was built afterwards. So that one is facing Petra. This one built above it is finally facing Mecca in 730. So something happens between 701 and 730 that changed the direction of Qibla. And that's brilliant because we have both those mosques in the same environs. Well, that's what I'm saying right here, 701 and 730. So there you can see, I'm sorry about the red line, it's getting washed out, I think, because of all the light coming in. The Jami al-Zaytuna Mosque in Tunisia. Now here, hold on, here is a fourth Qibla. Qibla number 4. And look and see where it's located. It's in Tunisia. The Tunisian mosque, the Algerian mosque, all the North African mosques create a completely new Qibla. He calls it the parallel Qibla. You'll see why it's the parallel Qibla. So this is Qibla number 4 in 732. Back up to 740, we're in Baalbek Mosque in Lebanon, 740, it's in between. Then we come to Mustah Mosque in Amman, Jordan. It's back to Petra again. Something's happening. What's happening? We'll explain it in just a bit. The Haran Mosque in Turkey, 744, it's in between. And the Qasr Qaidir Mosque in Kufa, 764. This is 130 years after Muhammad's death, and it's finally facing Mecca. The Ribat Fortress in Tunisia, again, as I said, all your North African mosques and your Spanish mosques are all facing parallel. The Sahih Ramda in Bohar in Oman, it's facing Petra. The Sumail Omani Mosque in Oman, 771, we think that's the date. It's back to Petra again, which is the first Qibla. The Raqqa Mosque in Syria, that's which is made famous by ISIS. That was their headquarters. That's still there. You can go and see it. It's facing in between. The Bibi Samarkand in Uzbekistan, it's back to Petra. The Cordoba Mosque in Spain, it's that parallel, again, like all the Spanish mosques. Jami Uqba Ibn, I'm desecrating Arabic for those who speak Arabic, but the Kiraud Mosque in Tunisia, it's back to that parallel mosque. Again, it's in North Africa. So we have the Petran mosques, then we have the in-between mosques, then you have the parallel Qiblas, and then the Meccan pillars, and then the parallel. So you have all the Qiblas were facing towards Mecca until 706. There was a confusion for the next 100 years. 17 of them face Petra, 8 are between, 10 face Mecca, and 6 are parallel. The Qibla was not finalized towards Mecca until 876. Almost 250 years too late. Are you finding why this is significant? So there's the first Qibla. Notice Petra, 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 Petra from all over, as far away as Guangzhou, even down here in Cherman in southern India. Most of the Qiblas facing Petra in the 1st century. Then a second set of Qiblas almost directly between Petra and Mecca, right there, right in the between. Then a third Qibla finally faces Mecca, but not until 727. Over 100 years after the Qiblas were canonized. And then you have these parallel Qiblas, which seem to be following a line directly between Petra and Mecca. We'll show you why that's significant. So, which is the most accurate Qibla? Most Muslims will say, well, that's because they didn't know how to do their direction until they got to Mecca. That's not the case. Take a look. You'll see the Petran Qiblas are 2.9 degrees accuracy, 1.9 if we take out the worst 2. In between are 0.98% accuracy. The Meccan Qiblas are 4.78 degrees accuracy. The parallel Qiblas are 3.5. In fact, the most inaccurate Qiblas are the Meccan Qiblas. So you can't use that theory anymore. Somehow, whoever started using the Meccan Qiblas didn't know their directions very well. Okay? The significance of Petra. We've got to go and see why Petra. Why is Petra so important? Well, anybody here been to Petra? Okay. Have you, when you went to Petra, did you know what I'm talking about when you went there? No. Is this the first time you're hearing what I'm saying? Yes. You'll have to go to Petra again. Okay, after this talk, I hope you all go back to Petra, because you're going to change what you're now going to know about this city. Petra has vegetation. It's in a valley. There is a parallel valley right next to it, very well known as parallel valleys. So it's in a valley, it has a parallel valley. Al-Bukhari, just take a look at all the references. It is with a stream. It has streams going through it. It has water. You can see water channels that are there. It has outside ruins. If there was a pillar of salt, it would be just outside of Petra. It has fields. It has places of profit. It has trees. It has grass. It has loam. It has olive trees. It has mountains overlooking the Kaaba. All of these fit Petra. Not one of these fit Mecca. Looks like whoever wrote the Quran had never been to Mecca. Take a look where Ad, Thamud, and Midian are. They're all located right around Petra. They must be important, yet all 3 civilizations are located in northern Arabia, not Petra, and certainly not Mecca, because that's 600 miles too far south. So why is this significant? Nothing is known of Muhammad until the late 7th century. His book, the Quran, and its manuscripts don't appear until the early 8th century. His city Mecca isn't referred to until the mid 8th century. His biography, the Siratul Rasulullah, and his saying the Hadith don't appear until the early and late 9th century. Thus, much of what we know of Muhammad is written down hundreds of years later and hundreds of miles away. It looks like he is nothing more than a later redaction, possibly begun by Abd al-Malik. How do I know? Well, let's go ahead. That's their conclusion. Questions we need to ask. Why are there no Muslim sources for 200 years? Why do the claims they make not fit the 7th century historical record? Why are the geographical references so few and confusing? And why do they all seem to fit an area much further north? You can read the rest of these. We need to keep moving on. I want to move on. But anyways, we do know that Mecca was not on the trade route. We don't have any map of Mecca, reference of Mecca on any map until 900. The Qiblas are all facing the wrong way for the first 100 years. Obviously, something is spurious. So what really happening? To make sense of this, we need to go back and we need to see what is happening historically. And we need to go back to this man, Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Abdullah ibn Zubayr was a governor of Petra underneath the Umayyad Caliphate. Now the Umayyads took over that part of the world. The Umayyads moved in and eradicated. They were the ones that took over and killed Ali and then killed his son Hussein, and they started the Umayyad Caliphate in 661. Here's what's curious. Where did they make their capital? Not in Medina, not in Mecca, but in Damascus, 1,000 miles further north. Why has no one asked that question? If these are the first Muslims, why are they so far north? So you have the Umayyads there. They start to wane in power by the time the Sufyani family then runs out of power by the 680s. A man named Marwan comes into power, reestablishes the Umayyad Caliphate, and his son Abd al-Malik then takes over power in 685. In 683, this man here, Ubay ibn Zubayr, rebels against the Umayyads. He's down in Petra. So the Umayyads need to do something, but they're way up in Damascus. Now, while that's happening, way up in Damascus, you have another group of people way over in what is today Baghdad. It was called Ctesiphon at that time. In Baghdad, you have another group. These are called the Abbasids. They hate the Umayyads. They are Persian, and they're warring. We'll get to that before I run it. But anyway, Zubair then rebels against the Umayyads, and then he then leaves Petra, and he takes the black stone with him. Hugely significant. Where the black stone is where God's presence is. Which means Petra is where God's presence was. That's why when you go to Petra, those of you who've been there, it's full of tombs and temples. Am I correct? That's the sanctuary. It's the Nabatean sanctuary. The Nabateans had that as their sanctuary since the 2nd century BC. The Nabateans are the people that give us the Arabic language. The Nabateans are the people that give us the name Allah. Allah is a Nabatean God. Almost everything we know about Arabic comes from the Nabatean script. Are you following, seeing the connections? So then you can see he then rebels against the Umayyads, and he doesn't, possibly he goes down to Mecca. We don't know. We do know that he comes to the Hijaz, which is that part where Mecca is situated. So he probably goes home. Destroys the Kaaba in Petra and then takes the black stone. The Abbasids who are in control in Kufa join the rebellion and support Zubair. Now here is Damascus, there is Baghdad, here is Petra, and here is Mecca. These two become the two sanctuaries for the two kingdoms. You have two different kingdoms, two different kingdoms that are vying for power. Now can you see what's going on? This is purely political, which makes all the sense in the world. Zubair needs allies, so he goes over to these guys over here and he says, I need him an ally. And he's down here, so they then inaugurate Mecca as their sanctuary. The Umayyads are way up here. Their sanctuary has always been Petra. From the 2nd century BC, it's been in Petra. It's always been Petra. Then we get to 685. Now remember, the Arabs had controlled Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Cairo by 652. They then moved right across Spain and then moved all the way over to India. That whole swath of land from Spain to India came under the control by 685. So when Abd al-Malik comes to power, he owns from Spain all the way to India. Huge swath of land. But he has no identity. All of his cities, they don't live in cities, so he gives the ruling of the cities to the Jews and the Christians because they are the educated people. They become maulas or mawalis. This has all been documented. But here's the problem. The Jews and Christians have a prophetic line. The Arabs don't. The Jews and the Christians have a revelation. The Arabs don't. So how are you going to create an Arab identity that is superior to the Jews and Christians? You're going to have to create a prophet, aren't you? You're going to have to create a prophet who comes in the line of Ishmael. So what does Abd al-Malik do? He needs this Arab identity. He therefore has to construct it. So what does he do? He starts with his coins. Now, earlier, all the coins had, these dinars, had the picture of the emperor. Now, I didn't know Muslims could have images. Yet here we have images of the caliphs. There's the Byzantine emperors. They take the same dinar and they put their own images on it. And that's an Arab image. They have the Byzantine cross. They just take the cross piece off, but they have the same cross that the Byzantines have. I had no idea that Muslims would want crosses on their coins. Nonetheless, the coins, all the way up until 691, including this one here. This is Abdul Malik. His own image is on his own coin. He then eradicates, destroys their coins, and mints new coins. And take a look what's on. You can't really see it there, but that is the Shahada. For there is only one God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. Muhammad is introduced on those coins in 691. That's the first time we see Muhammad referred to in any place, in any documentation. Oh, did I say the first? I lie. Because the same time he creates this huge building, the largest building of its day, called the Dome of the Rock, right there in Jerusalem. Why Jerusalem? Because Jerusalem is the kind of sanctuary for the Christians and Jews. And remember, he's no longer worried about the Sassanids. They have been destroyed. The Persians have been destroyed. His enemy are the Byzantines. They're the superpower of the day. Their headquarters, their sanctuary is right here in the Church of the Sepulchre. So he builds this building above the Church of the Sepulchre, up on the mount itself, right where supposedly Moses, where Moses saw the burning bush. So he's snubbing the Jews, he's snubbing the Christians. He puts his building, the largest structure of its day, still resplendent today, and look what he does. Now, what have you heard about the Dome of the Rock? When you ask any Muslim why that's important, that's the third most holy shrine, they will tell you that this is where Muhammad went to the seven heavens. Am I correct? The Miraj. Take a look inside and you will see that there's nothing about the Miraj inside. It is situated on the holiest city for both Jews and Christians. Why didn't they put it in Damascus? Because they wanted to say, we are the new men now. We are the new people. This is their Arab identity being pushed in a very big way. Let's look at the inscriptions. The only part of the building that's original are those two ambulatories. That building has been destroyed and rebuilt 11 times. The last time in 1876. And in 1876, they actually put the outside inscriptions. But these inner ambulatories still exist from the original building. And when you look at all the inscriptions, this is what you will find. Surah 4, Ayah 171. O people of the scripture, do not exaggerate in your religion. Jesus, son of Mary, was only a messenger of Allah, so believe in Allah and his messenger. Say not three, cease, for it is removed from his transcendence that he has no son. It's attacking the Trinity, it's attacking Jesus' divinity, it's attacking Jesus' sonship. This is totally an attack against Christianity. Are you following that? Surah 17, Ayah 111. Hath he not taken unto himself a son, hath no partner, nor hath he any protecting friend through dependence. And then Surah 112, here it is. He has no associate, that's again attacking Jesus, that's attacking the divinity of Jesus. He begetteth not, nor is begotten, that's attacking Jesus again as the begotten son. There is none comparable unto him. Muhammad is a messenger of God. They eradicate Jesus and reintroduce Muhammad. So here is Muhammad is being introduced on the Dome of the Rock, he's been introduced on the coins, and he's also been introduced on the protocols. The official protocols, Dr. Humeina Mosque has looked at all the official protocols from 661 all the way up until 691. There is no reference to Muhammad on those protocols, no reference to Muslims, no reference to Islam, no reference to the Quran until 691 when Abdul Malik introduces it overnight. In 691, the same year that he introduces the Dome of the Rock, the same year that he introduces it on the coins, he introduces it on the official documents. That God is one and Muhammad is his prophet. Now they have a prophet, but they've got a problem. That prophet has no book. You can't have a prophet without a book. So they need a book. Now that's going to be the next hour. I'm not going to get into that, but what we now know about that book, the earliest manuscripts do not appear until Abdul Malik. And they are not the same as the ones that appear in the 8th century. And they are not the same as the Quran we have today. I'm not going to do it again. Can you see the problem? Wait till the next hour until we show you what we found about that book. Every prophet has to have a book. But all the manuscripts do not even appear until the 8th century. They are not complete. They do not agree with each other. And they do not agree with the Quran we have today. So, here's a what-if possibility. Now, what I'm going to say today, I may not say in a year. This is nothing more than a what-if. This is all the evidence we have at our hands today. This is what we think. Now that the Muslims have a prophet, they are starting to get a revelation. They need a place. They need a sanctuary. They need a history to support everything. So by the 9th century, they then have a book, the man, the place, and the story. A new religion is formed and growing, yet not within 22 years, but evolving over 200 to 300 years. Once you get to place, you've got to put them away from Jerusalem. You've got to get them away from Petra. You've got to get them in Arabia. That's why Mecca was then chosen. And that's why the Abbasids. But what really happened was in 713 and in 738, 2 huge earthquakes came and destroyed Petra. Once the Petra was destroyed, God's presence was no longer there. And that's why they then moved everything down to Mecca. So Mecca was probably chosen during the time of Abd al-Malik, but became the official sanctuary after 720. And that's why the first mosque we have that now shows Mecca is not till 727. But then you need to have a history. Can you then understand why everything has been destroyed up until 833? Now can you understand why we now have the first biography of Muhammad is not written until 833? And by the time you start getting into his sayings in the hadith, remember that what we now know about the hadith, and every Muslim knows this, that al-Bukhari was given 600,000 of these akhbar, these sayings. And he whittles them down, whittles them all down to 7,397. From 600,000 down to 7,000. He throws away a 98% and only retains 2%. Wouldn't you love to know what happened? What was the other 98%? Wouldn't it be great if they had retained them so we could look at them today? Yet that 2% that was retained is not from the 9th century. There is not one manuscript we can find from the 9th century. The earliest manuscript we can find for al-Bukhari is not till the 13th century. And that's only 1 volume of 9 volumes. If you want to get all 9 volumes of the 7,397 hadith, you have to go to the 17th century. Can you see how this makes my job so easy? We haven't even got into the hadith manuscript problem. That's for the next lecture. I have 5 minutes. I need to keep going. They need a history. Therefore, the Sirah is introduced in 833. The hadith is introduced in 870. The tafsir, by the time they realize that they've got to make sense of all this material, the first tafsir is not introduced until 923 by Al-Tabari. And if you read Al-Tabari, has anybody here read Al-Tabari? None of you. You need to read Al-Tabari. He puts every idea possible, contradicting and not. And he says, you decide which is true. So even the first revelations, the first tafsir, the commentaries in the 10th century are absolutely confusing, contradictory, and no one's getting it. Because they're still putting it together. 300 years later. So not 22 years, but 200 to 300 years. New books are questioning the classical account. Why are there no sources for Muhammad for 200 years? They don't fit the historical record. Geographically, they're all off. Why do they all seem to be too much further north? No vegetation in that area. Mecca doesn't even get written down until 741, is not on any map until 900. The Qiblas all face Petra for the first 100 years. Then they start getting distorted, 4 different Qiblas, until finally one is canonized around 822 to 876. Then all Meccan Qiblas are then canonized up until today. Yet they cannot destroy those old mosques. They're still there facing Petra. They're still there facing in between. They can't destroy the citadel there in Dome of the Rock. So what's Abd al-Malik's role? Looks like he is the one that we're now crediting with starting this Arab identity. You have 2 completely different powers at war with each other. So that's why the Qiblas are facing parallel. The parallel Qiblas from North Africa, they want to see who's going to win out between the Abbasids and the Umayyads. They're hedging their bets. That's the same with the in-between. The in-between Qiblas all come from Al-Hajjaj. Al-Hajjaj was the governor of Kufa in 685 to 705. He rebels also against the Umayyads because he is much too strong. He realizes the Umayyads are too far away, and that's why he demands all his mosques face in between, waiting to see who's going to win out. Once they find out who wins out, which are the Abbasids, they then take over in 750, then all the mosques then face Mecca. It is completely political. This has nothing to do with God. This has nothing to do with Muhammad. This has nothing to do with anything religious. It is nothing more than political gain. That's exactly how religions are formed. And it's not me having to come to this conclusion. You can come to the conclusion just by looking at the material. Now let's look at Jesus. We know where Jesus was born, Bethlehem. We know where Jesus grew up, Nazareth. We know where Jesus died, Jerusalem. We know what Jesus did for the last 3 years. We know this from eyewitness accounts. We know this from hostile accounts, Tacitus, Josephus. Thallus would be Greek, Tacitus would be Roman, Josephus would be Jewish. We know that they were written between 15 and 60 years, and we know that few doubt his historicity. Thus, Christians have the right man at the right place, doing the right thing at the right time. So, where to from here? We need to confront these material. We need to get it out to the public sphere. That's why we're recording this today. This is all going to go up on YouTube. I don't mind anybody seeing my face, and I don't change my name, because we've got to get this out there so everybody can use it. I'm being asked to go all over the world and teach this now, especially in India. Especially in India. We need to get to India because we have some of India will soon be the largest Muslim country on earth in just 20 years. It is the fastest growing Muslim population. And the best debaters are in India. I have never seen better debaters than coming out of India. That's why our brothers here from Hyderabad. We need to help the Indians because they have no fear of Islam like you all have. I don't see this fear anywhere coming out of India. I was born in India. I grew up in India. I think God Lord prepared me for this kind of material. And that's why I think the Indian church and the Pakistani church and the Bangladeshi church are going to destroy Islam. Because right there, Islam is made up of 600 million Muslims in just those 3 countries. 3 times larger than the entire Arab world. We've got to help the Indian church. So this material is primarily for Asia. This is not for you people here in America, though it's good for you to know. This is for you to know. Don't you use this material, let us use it, okay? And we'll be training up the people there in India. Now, we do have a course called the Founder Course. If any of you would like to take this course, it's from September to April. It's 24 lessons long. We cannot teach this on any seminary. I'm not permitted to go into Bible schools, and if I do, no one is to know that I'm there, so I do go. But we have found the best way to get this material is to get to you on your computer. We have 100 people that took this course this last year. We have 300 already signed up for next year. We come right to where you are. We're already in 21 countries. It costs $265 for the whole course, for the whole year. It's every Tuesday morning, 7 to 9 here. 9 to 11. Oh, I can't remember the time. It's 9 to 11 Eastern Standard Time. You don't have to be there to watch it live. We will send it to you so you can pull it down at your own leisure. But all this will be is we're going to give you the PowerPoints for this, and every one of these material, you'll see these are all the titles. If you want to, come up to me afterwards. I'll have a paper right here. Sign your name, give me your email, and we'll send you the registration so you can register for it. Okay, that's all the time we have. I've now got to dovetail to the next lecture. So thank you for all your questions which you didn't ask, but you can get to me afterwards.